I think that's one of the most underrated aspects of homeschooling, honestly, is the fact that the school system is designed to progress you through all of these stages, and each one is a prerequisite for the next one. And the next one is like, you have to get to the end in order to have a stepping stone into the real world, is kind of the assumption that most people have. But when you're not constrained by all of this timeline and all of these requirements on your time, there's so much that you can do to bypass so many of those steps. Hello and welcome to the rebelEducator podcast. In this episode, I'm speaking with Mark Duran, the co-founder and CEO of StudentFirst Technologies, a software platform that allows parents and students to access state funding to pay for alternative education options. In this episode, we talk about Mark's experience growing up homeschooled back before homeschooling was cool, and how that experience shaped his perception of the education landscape. We talk about what he's building at StudentFirstTech and some of the types of educational approaches that his software tool is helping to enable. And we explore the changing landscape of education and what the coming decades in the education world might hold. But maybe background's actually a good place to start, because you and I have fairly similar backgrounds, but also very different, because everybody's homeschooling experience is super different. But you've been in the education world forever. You grew up in it. And I imagine that played a very large role in you wanting to be an ed tech founder. Let's talk a little bit about your childhood growing up homeschooled. You're from Northern Michigan, and you were homeschooled K through 12, right?
Yep. Yeah, I'd love to share about that. And we have similar backgrounds, but, they're going to be very different at the same time. So grew up in Northern Michigan, and everybody from Michigan does the hand, right? So I'm from way up here. We're like an hour and a half from Canada, and a little town called Harbor Springs, Petoskey. Most people know Northern Michigan for Traverse City, which is kind of a more touristy place. Ours is a really small town, but so homeschooling became legal in Michigan in 1993. Before that, I think a family and I actually went to jail for it. So homeschooling went from illegal to they passed the law in Michigan in 1993, and it's now homeschooling. In 1993 it became legal, and it became the most unrestrictive state. My mom was she was an elementary teacher, and they had, previous to that, just started their own construction company after getting married. My sister, I have an older sister and a younger brother. My sister was born in 1993, and my mom was like, wow, she learned about homeschooling and went to a conference with somebody that she knew, kind of really opened her eyes to alternative education. And she went to that conference, I think downstate or out of state, and came back and was like, when we have kids, I'm going to homeschool. So we had they had their first, my sister Olivia, in 1993, and she started a homeschool group shortly, thereafter. So how she started the group was she found another mom who was interested in homeschooling, and then I think they named it. It was called like Soaring High early on, and very kind of unofficial, but they're just like, we're doing this. And long story short, Northern Michigan, kind of a rural area, hard to get to. We're like 4 hours from the Michigan border. But what they started took off, and it was very unofficial early on. They had just families coming and meeting, and what the two moms started and kind of had loosely organized, families would come in from other parts of the state, learn about how they were doing it, and then would go start their own groups. So our group started, very small, and then grew to, I think it was like 80 families in the Northern Michigan area. And then those kind of broke off as the group grew and scaled. And then, so I think she's unofficially accredited with like starting half this group, like homeschooling groups in Northern Michigan, or being part of that. Because at one point when we got dial-up at our house, she had this homeschool information network that she was just like taking names and putting it on this giant email list. So she had hundreds of names in this list. And I remember going places, and she had a notebook where people could write down their email address, and she would come back and I'd hear the dial-up noise, and she'd be adding to it and sending out updates. So our group was really cool group in Northern Michigan, and we just met like a couple times a month. It wasn't a total like resource, like a total replacement for schooling. It was like an additional resource for families, and we stayed very involved with it up until really when all of us kids were in high school, and then kind of left at that point. But at one time, we had ski days at our local skiing resorts. We had field trips, and we had science fairs and all of these different kinds of programs where families would, mostly the moms would rotate in and out teaching classes or doing something with the curriculum. So it was a really cool experience growing up in that environment. And then growing up in an entrepreneurial family, my family owns a fine home building business. So we do like high end like lake houses and extreme home makeover type work. So I grew up in that, and kind of cut my teeth on kind of small business, self-employed mindset early on. That's kind of how we got started, how we got into homeschooling. Both my parents were public schooled, and had a, I wouldn't say they had a bad experience with it. I think my dad wasn't maybe the greatest student. He was kind of a rebel in his own way, right? Like he didn't really fit the
Yep.
system, and started his business early on, taught himself how to draft. He basically became an architect, and now our local community, there's homes all over that he built that are kind of iconic to the area. So it's kind of growing up in that, you learn to think differently kind of at an early age. So that's kind of my background on how we got started homeschooling.
How did your mom meet all of these fellow homeschoolers in the era of dial up where it was a lot harder? Like you couldn't just sit down and Google, hey, where are the homeschoolers in my area? And especially in a place where homeschooling was recently legal, I
Mhm.
would imagine there weren't huge networks to tap into. How did all of these people connect with her?
Yeah, so that's a great question. From my you know uh, conversations with her of how this got started early on. It really started with her and another mom, and then it's like word of mouth. And I think there's you're finding this with what you're building, is that when you're doing something different, there's kind of a silent majority that will kind of come out of the woodworks. And I think that's what happened. Families, even from like an hour away, would hear about it, and they would come in and learn about it, maybe attend a few homeschool groups or some events and things like that. And then would be put on the list, and then they would go start something. So I think it kind of attracted people early on because there was an interest in homeschooling. I think I've seen you tweet about it a little bit. Like homeschoolers for a while kind of got a bad rap because, from like kind of like this
100%.
image of, do they turn out okay? And there's definitely, pros and cons of probably every different kind of education model. And I think that there's some probably early on homeschoolers where families that really were homeschooling out of fear because they had a bad experience. And I was fortunate that wasn't the case. Like my parents both had a fine experience. My mom was a teacher before this. They just wanted to have more agency over what we were learning, and making sure it fit with the family values. And they wanted the flexibility too. So we were able to travel when everybody else was still in school. We got to travel, go to parks and national parks and do things without lines, and that was a great perk. But back to your question about how they got started, I think it was just really grassroots, like word of mouth. And then she was the first person with doing an email list and information that blossomed even for a time. We had like a local co-op, like this giant semi truck would like back down our driveway, and it would like unload all this like health food and just like good deals on like really good food and stuff from downstate. And because families were interested in it, and people would come over and cut my mom checks for the stuff that they bought. So it kind of created this ecosystem. And also, I have my dad's younger brother homeschooled him and his wife homeschooled their family. He was also a builder, and they have 7 kids. So that made up a pretty big majority of the group. And then, I had cousins down in Grand Rapids who homeschooled as well. And there's a big group down there. So I think it just kind of, my mom would go to a homeschool conference once a year to get books and things like that. And speakers would come and stay with us and stuff like that. So it kind of just blossomed. And I'm really excited though about, and I know we'll talk more about this later on, but like the resources and opportunities that are available for families now in alternative education are just exponentially, more available than they were back when I was, still in school. So I'm really excited about that for families.
Yeah, I feel the same way. We've talked about this before, that it's such a different world than when you and I were growing up homeschooled and the resources were few and far between and you really had to work to find them. There's so much more now. But it's also, I feel like it's so inspiring to hear the stories of people who did it and did it well before all of these resources existed, because it's like, well, if these people can do it with no resources, then like maybe I'll be okay doing it with the resources that exist now. And it sounds like your mom was exceptionally entrepreneurial. It sounds like she had a very I hesitate to say opportunistic, just because feel like people kind of take that the wrong way sometimes, but like she was able to see opportunities very clearly and capitalize on them and create resources for a very large number of people. And I imagine that probably had a huge impact on you, not just to be homeschooled, but to be being homeschooled by this person who was building this whole network of homeschoolers and selling them things and offering them resources. I imagine that that shaped your perspective of how the world works quite a bit.
Yeah, it was. She had a gift for bringing people together, and she. I think if this would actually probably be a good conversation to have with her, because she's awesome. Her perspective is really unique on it. She was like, I wanted to homeschool and I wanted a homeschool group, but I didn't want to become part of somebody else's. So she's like, I had to create what I wanted, and she's definitely a go-getter, and all that. Her and my dad started a construction company from basically zero, and built it up to a very successful organization that's still going on today over 30 years later. And she never made a dollar off of probably any selling anything with homeschooling. It was just like the co-op and the different resources. It was just that cost to. She like the co-op was something she wanted, so she opened it up to other people. So there's I think they had a bank account at one time for the homeschool group. He's like, I don't even know what happened to that, because I think they like charged like $5 a year or something for families to, I don't know, be a part of it. But we met in like church buildings and things like that, and kind of grew our way up to one point we even had like a partnership with a community college, and we did gym days there, and like basketball and different sort of classes at the community college. So that was kind of a part of it.
That's amazing. And I feel like, entrepreneurship, the benefits don't just have to be monetary. They can there's all different types of benefits that you can be creating. And I feel like there's something so important that I think homeschoolers get to see a lot more than public schoolers do, because they're just in the world watching people work and make things happen. They're not just in this environment where they're stuck in a classroom following rules that were set a century ago by some bureaucrat.
Exactly.
But like you're able to see people go from idea to execution to reaping the rewards of that execution when you're out in the world interacting with people who are making things happen, like both of your parents were. And you and I talked about this a little bit recently on Twitter, but I know that you had a lot of experiences as a kid where you got to be learning not just from traditional school subjects, but also from going out and doing things with your family. Are there specific things that stand out to you that were like non-traditional education experiences that you feel like you drew a lot from, or that were important to your development, either your understanding of how the world works or the actual skills that you bring to the table now as an adult?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know that back to that the conversation we had on Twitter. I know you have we have a very similar kind of valuable takeaways that we were able to experience with our families. If I really think back to it, if I need to summarize it, it's a long list, and I know you have a long list as well. But I would say that the agency over our time that we had, and I'll even start off with something like, this is probably not what a lot of people expect me to say, but the ability to be like, have the opportunity to be bored and having to go find something that you're interested in. A lot of families are so, especially if both parents are working and the kids are in school and they have programs, they're like constantly going, and it's just like this, like, kind of a hamster wheel of just like the next thing. And my family was like, we were very busy with our business life, them running the company and homeschooling and different things, but they wouldn't just like book stuff just to be busy. And the experiences that I guess I had with them was like, I was able to do my school kind of at my own pace, especially later on in middle school and high school, and then maybe go work with my dad the rest of the day on his job site. So he'd be maybe building 3 houses, and meeting with clients, and maybe I would just be there with the guys, cleaning up the job site or something. But I got to be part of his world, which was meeting with contractors, negotiating over prices, and running errands for him when I could drive. Going paying bills at the local contract, at the local lumber yards and stuff like that, dropping off checks for like 50K, or just being part of that system. And then I would say with my mom, early on, like just like you said, being able to go grocery shopping and learning about economics of dollars, and tying that back to my work, like, early on, like maybe I would get paid to weed the garden or something like that, because my mom had a big garden as well. Or maybe I'd work for a client or something and make $5 an hour early on. And, then my mom would always tie that back to like, okay, you made some money. Like now you want to go blow it on this toy. Like how many hours of you working will that take, to buy that? And now, do you really want that after all? And so she taught us to be frugal in that sense, and not just spending money because you have it. Learning the value of a dollar, and that led to being able to save money early on, and that led to more opportunities for me later, especially after I graduated, having that kind of flexibility. So yeah, I'd say there's a lot of like auxiliary benefits from it that I couldn't just point to one, but I'd say that agency over time and being involved with my parents' life was really interesting. And then where it really became exponentially beneficial for me is the relationships I was able to form with some clients of my dad's early on, and the ability to have those relationships with them. And then like there's some pretty wealthy people that we'd done building for. And then I was able to work. I started my own property management business when I was before I graduated high school. So I was taking care of these homes for people, and got to know the owners on a personal basis, and developed a really good rapport with them, taking care of their homes and opening, closing, managing sprinkler people coming in and going and stuff like that. Projects around their house. And then that led to a kind of fast forward the benefits, right? That led to a personal invite. After I graduated high school, I was going to take a gap year anyway, because I didn't really know, I wasn't dead set on doing one thing. And I got an invite from one of the clients to come down and work for him at his company in Louisiana. And they own a giant river transportation company. So they run the barges and the boats that run up and down the Mississippi River that deliver like our nation's commodities. And so I got to work. I actually got to live with him. He's the CEO and president of the company. I got to live with him in his place. And then during the days, I was just like any other guy. I got to go work with his managers and people on boats and barges. And, 19 years old, I had, a company truck and office, but like I was working like 12-hour days and just all over Louisiana doing stuff. And that really kind of opened my eyes to like a bigger business vision. And that, I got to travel with him personally, and he spoke into my life in a big way. So that was probably the biggest, because of that agency over time early on, it led to relationships like that blossomed into where I still have relationships with those people today.
That's amazing. And I think that's one of the most underrated aspects of homeschooling, honestly, is the fact that the school system is designed to progress you through all of these stages. And each one is a prerequisite for the next one. And the next one is like, you have to get to the end in order to have a stepping stone into the real world, is kind of the assumption that most people have. But when you're not constrained by all of this timeline and all of these requirements on your time, there's so much that you can do to bypass so many of those steps. Like you were able to go and basically make the whole college experience entirely obsolete because somebody was offering you a job to go like do the work that college is supposed to be preparing you to do. Mm-hmm. I feel like so many homeschoolers have stories like that, and most people just don't realize that. When, like, to go back to your comment earlier about how people really worry about homeschoolers and their ability to be like, are you going to grow up to be okay? Are you going to make it in the real world? I feel like that aspect of it gets entirely missed and forgotten about. And it's so important. And I think it's like, of course, that's a part of your experience because you've gone on to be an entrepreneur. And we'll talk about this in a little bit, like all the stuff that you're doing now. The path was, you were able to very organically follow that path instead of being constrained by all of these timelines and requirements that probably would have set you back significantly compared to where you are now, I would imagine.
Yeah. I've heard a bit of your story, and from our conversations, also some of your podcasts that you've been on about how you kind of skipped college as well, and looked at it as kind of a challenge to say, hey, I could go and I could go do this and this and this, or I can look at it as a challenge and see if I can, kind of quote unquote beat the system. And I kind of had a similar, maybe it wasn't as clear as that early on, but I just knew that by the time I was out of high school, I was honestly really done with doing stuff in school. I was just, my mom would say she gets a chuckle that, I wouldn't say I was a bad student. I just didn't enjoy learning anything or having to do anything that I could relate back to my life. And when you're working a lot early on, you're like, I could be like, I have to be reading this book to graduate that doesn't have anything to do with anything, or I could be making, more money. I could be doing a business or doing something I want to do. So it's like I kind of always had that give and take before I was graduated, and I did a lot of like I was dual enrolled in my before I graduated. Went to like a college for welding actually, and went to work for this big company. It was at this giant company in Michigan. They had a college. They had a welding course that got you college credit. So I do have some college credits. I have no idea where they're at, but I did go there and I got certified in all types of welding. And I thought that for early on, I thought I might be interested in that. And then after working in that for a long time, I was like, I don't think I want to do this. The guy who actually started that was like basically flunked out of public school, and now he owns a worldwide company. And in northern Michigan is probably one of the most successful guys in eastern northern Michigan to this day. But he was like the worst student in his school. So I kind of stories like that got me excited early on, because I was like, man, I don't have to just go do what everybody else is doing. And a lot of even my friends in homeschooling were all going to college right away, and kind of going down that route, which was totally fine. And it was worked out phenomenally for most of them. And but for me early on, it was just like I really wanted to go kind of see the world and have an adventure.
So you ran a property management company while you were in high school. We need to talk about this more, because that is way too interesting a story to not unpack. Um, how did you do that? How did you become a property manager while you were a teenager?
Yeah, so I didn't own the properties, but I in our area on some of these homes that my dad would build and do remodels on, when a house gets to a certain size, and it takes quite a bit, you have landscaping that has to be done, and people have to blow out sprinklers and start the house up. Plumbers have to come in and go in. And there's always, on a big house, there's always like projects that they want done, the owner wants done. So I kind of, in high school, I just started, like, we'd finish this project for how I got started, and we finished this project for the president and CEO of this company that I ended up working for in Louisiana. But in high school, he was looking for somebody to like take care of his yard. And like, I was, this is back before I could drive. And I was like, 14, 15. And my dad was like, we finished the project for him. And then he asked me if I wanted to do this work for him. And I was already, working for my dad's business at the time. So I worked for our Duran building, is our company name. And so I was working for him part-time, and then I was doing this part-time. And that's how I got my start in it. And so I started basically, I had the keys to the house and would manage the whole property. And he had multiple properties, kind of near the lake, and one on the lake and one off the lake, and taking care of their vehicles, and even like sometimes if they're flew in, like pick them up from the airport, stuff like that. So there's always like stuff to do, and that's how I got my start in it. And then through high school, I continued to do that, and it was like good business. I took on some other projects and properties, and would help with other property managers, because there's other guys in our area who make a great living doing this, and they're, it's with how they support their family is basically, managing properties. And so I kind of saw what they were doing, and then started doing it myself, and then did that through high school.
And then you were picking up other clients like through word of mouth. How did it expand? I'm so curious about the business logistics of this.
Yeah. So I kind of through our building company. So we'd finish a project or something, and they'd be like, "Hey, I need a guy, right, to be on call to take care of stuff for me." So I would be that guy. And, so I'd work directly with the client, and their punch list of stuff they need, shutting down the house or opening it up or whatever they need. And so I had a direct relationship, like a business relationship with that client. And then that really was growing well for me through high school. I was doing a lot with that, plus working for our family business. So I was building houses as well. And then I was dual enrolled. And then I grew up racing motorsports. Like I was in Northern Michigan, snowmobiling is a big thing, and dirt bikes. So I raced competitively in that. So I actually had my own like kind of small business where I build race engines for people at our house. And I worked for a guy one day a week who owned a race shop. And I was very hands-on in that sense. So I was kind of doing a lot in high school, and all combined with getting everything I needed to do to graduate. So it was a pretty busy time in my life.
So you were very involved in like more traditional, like blue collar types of work,
Mm-hmm.
where you were doing property management, and you were doing, like you said, you took welding courses, and you were working for this transportation company. How did you end up back in the education space?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I've always been a voracious reader. So through high school, everything, I've just read a lot. And after I came back, I worked in Louisiana for about a year, and then the guy I was working for there, he even offered to send me to college. He's like, if you want to go to college, like you want to stay with the company, like whatever you want to do, like I can help you out with it. And I was like, I really looked at his life. He's like 60 plus years old at the time, and he owns this company, and was managing partner in it. And I looked at his lifestyle, and I was like, he back to agency over time. He had control of his time. He was able to do what he worked really hard, and he's very dedicated to his business, but he's able to he had control of time. And I looked at guys who worked for his company for 30 years, and I'm like, you can be a really good employee, but they were still on the 9 to 5 schedule with them. And I was like, this guy who's like way older than I am has a cooler lifestyle than anybody else I know. He hunts all over the place. He has this he's a avid sportsman and spends a great time with his wife. They travel together, and I was just like, I don't really know how I want to own my own company one day. And this is when I was 20 years old. I'm 28 now, and I'm like, I don't really know how that works, but I know I want to start going in that direction, because I know that he told me, he's like, you don't have to go to college to run a business, but you have to be relentlessly curious, read a lot of books, and meet people who are in the industry that you want to be in. And so you can learn from them. He said, that's how I've done it. So I just kind of started going in that direction from like 20 years old. So I moved back, did more in property management at that time, increased my, the houses I was managing while working for my dad. And then really started just digging in more on like the business side of it, reading a lot of business books. And then I actually had an opportunity come up through what I was doing in property management to work for a guy who he's a pretty private individual, so I have to be careful how I say this because I can't say too much about it. But his company used to own like Proactive face wash, and they've now since sold it, and it's all public information, so I can say that. But he owned a home in a really nice area in Northern Michigan, and I heard that through word of mouth they were looking for like a new property manager. So I got in with that family and started working for their properties, and I think they had like 6 or 8 properties or something like that, all in the area. But he was an entrepreneur, and he started a company that became very, very successful. They lived on the West Coast, and by working for him as a property manager, I was kind of his right-hand guy for all the summers. And he had a similar story to me, except for he did go to some college, but it was unrelated to his business. And he was like, he was kind of self-made in the sense of like just reading books. And he actually helped launch Tony Robbins back in the day. His marketing company did. So he was just like kind of on this next level of kind of the business and life. And he was older as well, but he was really inspiring to me. And I was able to work through that opportunity. And then I kind of hit a point in the property management piece where I was getting so many people were like asking me to do work. And I really looked at it and I was like, this isn't really what I want to do long term. So I kind of put the brakes on getting new clients. And because at that point, I wanted to kind of go do something else, and I didn't know exactly what that was. So that's kind of where I started making the transition out of maybe if you call it like blue collar work, and I started looking into other options. Um, and then, yeah, that kind of led me into the transition to where I'm at today.
And tell us, actually, before we delve, because I have a lot of questions about your journey and stuff, but let's do context for what you're doing now
Mm-hmm.
first. Can you just like walk through the elevator for pitch of what Student First Tech is and what it is that you guys are building?
Yeah, absolutely. So my co-founder, Forrest Fowler, we started this about 2 years ago. We both had a background in technology companies. He was a software engineer and developer with his own company, and he'd previously built and sold a co-working space. And so he has an alternative education background as well. He did homeschool, pod school, like kind of a micro school and public school. So he went through the whole experience. He went to Kelley Business School, graduated from there, and by the time he graduated, like business school, he had already become pretty successful in his software consulting company that he taught himself how to code through like YouTube and courses. And so he by the time he was he just self educated through the learning how to write code and be a software developer. So he lives in Bloomington, Indiana, and I had previously to this, how we kind of, what about, your question about student first technology. So we both had a background in tech startups, and he was, building them for founders. I was part of a company, and I helped raise some money for it for the founder, and working in partnerships. And previously to that, I'd worked in a marketing agency and also a big publishing company. That's kind of how I got into that, led into tech startups. But back to student first technology. So we help administer education funding programs. And what that looks like is there's vouchers, education savings accounts, micro grants, and tax credit scholarships. And so Student First as a whole specializes in that. We have a platform called Theodore that can handle any type of education funding program. And we operate in 15 states and administer over $100 million a year to families for K through 12 education purposes. And then kind of more background on Student First. We see that families, they're not as worried about like the policy that creates an education funding program or opportunity as they are the ability to easily access it and find it and take advantage of it. So we're really focused on making that more accessible to families going forward as alternative education is growing. And education savings accounts are really kind of becoming the gold standard. There's more and more micro grant programs going on. Our company runs the technology and services for the Indiana Learns microgrant program in Indiana. So it's a statewide microgrant program that empowers fourth and fifth graders who are behind in reading and math to be able to get caught up through high quality tutoring. So we're in the process of bidding on other states and opportunities similar to that. So that's kind of about the company and how it works.
What do you mean by bidding on different projects? Like what are the actual mechanics of you guys getting into a new state and being able to serve a new subset of families?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We got started. It's a very niche space because it's very small right now, and it's highly complex. The financial reporting and what the software has to do for compliance and reporting is it's complicated. I can just say that. And so we got to start with partnering with nonprofit organizations that administer tax credit scholarship programs. So that's where donors were able to donate to the nonprofit, and they get a tax credit in return for doing that. It varies on a state-to-state basis, and then that money gets used for a scholarship for a family who applies for it. So really, for an education funding platform like ours, it really has to handle the eligibility piece, the applications for the families, the payments piece, the kind of a marketplace to be able to connect with the school or provider. And then for the administrators, it has to be a good administrative dashboard and for reporting to states and everything like that. So to answer your question, how do you go about bidding on these? We started off just partnering with nonprofits, which was, kind of a standard like B2B partnership process. And then now where kind of this niche industry is going is states are putting out a request for proposal, an RFP, and then it allows companies like ours to be able to respond to that proposal. And then you have to write a technical proposal. We have people we work with who help us with that, because some of them can be up to like 40 pages long, depending on, on what the proposal is.
Wow, that is lengthy.
Yeah.
So what's dictating, if you guys are in 15 states right now, what's dictating which states you're able to serve and which ones you aren't? Because I know a lot of people are very murky on how this, like, okay, we know there's funding out there, but we don't really know how to access it. We don't know how it works. What does that look like for you guys?
Yeah, so it's all about the policies that are getting brought about in these states. So, for example, Arizona, we don't run the ESA Education Savings Account program in Arizona, but they have a universal eligibility program for education savings accounts. It just got recently passed, this law. So now families there are eligible for this. It's like $6,500 to $7,000 per year per student. And then if there's some special need components, that amount can go up. But so that program is kind of looked at as a gold standard in states, where it's really redirecting a portion of the per pupil funding that's funded through like property taxes, and then allowing that to go directly to families. So there's a saying in this kind of niche industry called funding students, not systems. Corey DeAngelis is a great person I'm sure you know on Twitter, and he's kind of championed
Yes.
that phrase. But so there's a really big push just to take that per pupil funding and give, if not all of it, but a percentage of it back directly into the hands of the family, so that they can spend it on education purposes. And how that looks kind of on a state to state level is, as these laws get passed, there has to be compliance, right? So instead of just wiring that money into a bank account and it kind of disappearing, platforms like ours exist where that funding can go into the platform. If we partner with a state or the agency that's administering the program, or if we're doing the whole administration, it creates basically an enclosed system where the family still have the agency to spend that money on any sort of education service that they'd like to. And that education service varies, again, since it's complex, on a state-to-state basis on what you can spend the money on. So that's where our software comes in and verifies the different expenditures and how the program works.
How many families or how many students have you been able to serve since launching?
Yeah, so we're going on. I can't do exact numbers for you just on this, but it's tens of thousands that we have in the system. And then by the end of the year, we're adding probably another tens of thousands to it.
That's amazing. And I imagine that is probably incredibly rewarding to stop and think about how many students your work is directly impacting and how many kids you're directly benefiting by just opening up all of these options for them and making it accessible. How do families find you? And I also, as like a sidebar question to that, and maybe this makes sense to address first, I feel like a lot of families in these states where funding is available don't even know it's there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like a lot of people have access to resources that they're entirely unaware of, and there's probably a very large education component to what you're doing. So how are people, like, what has your experience been around how aware people even are of what's accessible to them? And then how are people finding you and starting to use the services that you can offer them?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Historically, through our nonprofit partners, we've really been the silent partner on the technology. So we help, historically, like our family's experience with StudentFirst and our platform really is not front and center. It's like, oh, it's super easy to check my eligibility and submit an application and receive my award amount. So that's like where we come in, because there are different states and programs. They're like, hey, you need to scan this PDF or like fax this information in, or the application is really lengthy. It's hard for a family to do. So our whole approach from early on was, how do we make technology so easy to use that like a mom with maybe a single mom or single parent with a low cost smartphone, who's working 3 jobs and has kids going to different events, can find out and easily apply for that on their phone while they're on the go. So that's kind of been the litmus test of like what the technology that we are building is going to on a user front. So, taking that, it's in our name, Student First Technologies, is focusing on the student's experience and the family experience first, working our way backwards into like the education provider and then the family. So to answer your question more directly, how do families kind of find out about us? Like I said, historically, we're on the back end administering these programs for nonprofit partners. So we're not public facing in that sense. Where we kind of see the market shifting to be, there's more and more need, and we're getting kind of tapped to, hey, you need to look into this. And we're getting calls from people, hey, can you do this for us and do this? And there's more of a need going forward for a kind of a, more family facing experience. And something that we'll be releasing later on this month is speaks to that family facing experience. With a couple partnerships and some product features and some different pieces that we're really excited about. But to answer your question, we've really been a kind of behind the scenes partner for a lot of time on this. And my co-founder, Forrest, actually, he started building this platform for a partner like 8 years ago. So we really started in one state, and he has a really deep experience in this space, and he understands the policies extremely well. Because he's a wealth of knowledge around it. And then he's been able to apply in his software consultancy career before this, a lot of like compliance in the banking industry and fintech industry that we've been able to build into our system as well. So I hope that kind of answers your question. For the longest time, we've been kind of a silent partner in this experience for families, just being behind the scenes. But as the kind of the sectors is growing, we're working on some more public facing pieces.
What are the biggest nonprofits that you're partnered with? Are there big names in the space that you're primarily working with?
Yeah, we have NDAs with everybody, so I couldn't say those just yet, but we have multi-state nonprofit partners that work on behalf of kids. And then we have like MOUs, memorandum of understanding of some really big organizations. And we're kind of, we have multi-state partners. We have some partners that only partner in one state. In the 15 states that we operate in, we have some partners, or we have multiple partners in each state. But some of them only are in one state or 2 states, and then all others are in 5+ states. So it kind of varies on that, but kind of answer your question, that's in a roundabout way. There's a later on this month, and then the 1st of December, there'll be a lot of public facing information about some partnerships with some pretty big organizations coming up.
Got it. Well, then let me pivot the question. Yeah. I feel like there's a lot of people don't know where to go to find information on what is available to them in their states. Mm-hmm. There are, like, you're in 15 states, and I would imagine a very large percentage of the parent population in most of those states, with the exception of probably Arizona, which is very public facing right now. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody knows that's available. Mm-hmm. But in a lot of these states, there probably is a very large percentage of the parent population that has no clue that there's anything accessible to them at all. And there are probably a lot of parents who are struggling to figure out how to afford pulling their kids out of the system and don't even know where to turn to explore what might be available to them. What would your recommendation to those parents be? How do you find out what's available to you? Who do you turn to? Who do you ask? Are there databases of information? Are there organizations that are answering these questions for parents? How can parents educate themselves on what's available to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a solution that we're actively building right now, and it's not completely public knowledge yet, but we're building the need that you just voiced. We are building a solution that completely speaks to that, and that's coming out very soon for families. It'll be a national resource. But I'd say really the best way for families to understand about and find more options, there's a lot of great nonprofits and organizations, kind of like family-led organizations and states that you can plug into. I'm trying to think of a couple names that would be good. And I would say like in the states that have the most options, there's several great, like pretty prolific nonprofits that are doing a lot of public facing outreach about educating families around the opportunities that are available. Also, EdChoice is edchoice.com or .org. You can go on there and actually look at their map and see every education policy component and like what's available in different states. And they have some pretty good links as well. There's not so much, you can't really quite go in there and like create an account and then get all your eligibility information, but you could go to that website, look at their state map, and then look at, okay, I'm in this state. These are the programs that are available, and they keep an up-to-date list on different programs and opportunities that are available for families.
What do you see? Like the space has changed so much since you've started 2 years ago. I mean, obviously the big news has been Arizona. Yeah. It's been very highly publicized. It's a huge shift. It's very exciting. Hopefully it's setting a really powerful precedent for the rest of the country to follow. But even beyond Arizona, there's been so much movement in the school choice world to like such a big push to drive change. What have been the biggest changes that you've seen in the past couple of years that you've been like really immersed in this? And are there things that you're particularly excited about that you're watching unfold?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that the biggest, I think when Forrest and I first started working together around 2 years ago, there was a lot of talk about education savings accounts and funding families, not systems, funding students, not systems. So there's the policy folks were really going hard on that and doing a great job, with awareness and pushing for these programs. But the real, like on the ground, there really wasn't a lot happening because of these laws hadn't got passed yet. COVID, for better or for worse, really accelerated a lot of this because of, so many families with schools being shut down, they were looking for other options. So I would say COVID really accelerated that. And then just recently with the test scores that have come out, we've seen that, students have really kind of went backwards heavily in learning loss. So that's sparking a huge demand for more like micro grant programs. States really heavily looking at ESA programs, and also like the parent voices. Like I was talking to somebody in Arizona recently, and families there are just really pushing for better experience, more opportunities. And other states, we have people reach out to us. Hey, how can you help us? And we go, well, we're not policy folks. So we don't do lobby for laws, and we're not on that end of it. We help administer the laws that do get passed. But I do point them to organizations like for states that are individuals who are looking to create change in their state. There's a lot of great organizations. Yes, Every Kid, American Federation for Children. EdChoice. There's so many organizations out there. We have actually a list on our website. If you go to the bottom, there's in the resources tab. We call it the Roundtable of School Choice Champions, and it's a big list of organizations that are championing, education freedom for families. So that's a good list for people to go to, and if they want to look and learn more about organizations that are really kind of working really hard on behalf of students.
Do you have particular programs or education options that are favorites of yours that you see parents using this money to go fund? Like I imagine you're in a really interesting position to see a lot of the different innovative schools and innovative models that are emerging. And we're living in a very exciting time to be in the education world. There's so much happening. Are there any personal favorites of yours that you think are particularly cool models?
Yeah, I would say the education savings account model is really cool because it's just taking a piece of that, the per pupil funding that's paid through on property taxes, and redistributing that back to the family. So that's those programs like that are very kind of, I understand that at a deep level because for my family and all the families that relatives and friends and family that I grew up with who were involved in alternative education, we were all paying our taxes as if we were going to school. So there's this giant school that's well capitalized of sports teams, and I played sports for our local public schools. Obviously like Little League, you pay for that out of pocket, but so I had a lot of friends, in public schools and private schools, and I played sports for private and public schools growing up. But I would say that, coming from that, I know, like, I remember, like, my cousins actually, they actually moved zip codes because they were homeschooling, and some of their kids wanted to go play sports for this local school, but they weren't allowed to because of, they were literally lived like a half a mile from the zoning in zip codes. So they actually sold their big dream house and everything that they had built over the years, and kind of moved the whole family into another zone just so they could their son could play football, and they could kind of access more of those opportunities through the public school, because they were allowing our school systems allowed for homeschoolers to be able to play sports for those schools. I think I answered your question. Maybe I kind of went off on a tangent.
You did. Yeah. Well, let me ask a follow-up
Yeah.
to it, which is like, what about the actual schools that are being built? Are there specific, because there's so many different models with that too. There's like micro schools and different types of online schools and project-based schools. And you have a really deep understanding of all of this because you had a very individualized education. Are there specific school models that are particularly exciting to you?
Yeah, I really like the micro school models. There's an organization, the National Micro School Organization. Don Soifer runs it out in Las Vegas, and they're kind of building resources around micro schooling. I really like the micro schooling model. I like the pod school model. There's some unschooling models that you talk a lot about that are really cool. I think that as I kind of see the future of K through 12 education, and as we see it, I think it's going to be, it's going to allow a family to be able to have the resources, and then it's going to incentivize the marketplace for more education providers to build unique solutions that can really tailor fit to the child's interests and goals. And that's what really excites me, because I think growing up, like, if I would have, I was a very hands-on learner growing up, and if I would have had, if we had an ESA program and different micro schools, I could have been plugged into probably like a kind of a business focused one or a creators focused one. And so I think that to answer your question on the school models, yeah, all the micro school, all the alternative models, I think are really cool. We see, like, we look at it as the education space, and it's hard to imagine a world where like a public school would completely go away, because there's like over 130,000 public schools, and that's far surpasses the amount of a lot of big franchises in the world. So like, there's already this giant ecosystem of education, like facilities, right? So, but I have heard some of cool models. Like there's a guy who runs a micro school out of a public school classroom in Colorado. So I think that we might see more of a shift for some of these public schools as they have to become more competitive to allow more dual enrollment, maybe like kind of co-op classes out of them. So I think that I'm really excited to see how it all shakes out, because there's so many cool models right now, and I can only imagine how many more there will be in another 5 years to 10 years. So I'd say all of the above.
If you were starting your education experience now, and I feel like this is such an interesting thought experiment, just because the world is so different now than it was in the 90s and the early 2000s when you and I were being homeschooled, and they're just like, the options just weren't there the way that they are now. And now there's so much. There are these micro schools. There's really interesting online schools, different types of project-based schools. There's self-directed learning centers where you're coming in and everybody's doing a different curricula or whatever, but they're doing it all like co-working spaces for kids. There's so much. And you touched on this a little bit, but I'd be curious to hear you delve a little bit deeper. Like, if you could choose any model of education out of the existing options now for like elementary school age Mark, but he's living in 2022, what would you pick? Which one do you think you would most enjoy going through? Is there something specific?
Yeah, I think if little Mark had to go do it all over again, I would keep the homeschool experience. I'd definitely play sports for the local leagues, whatever that might be, wherever they're most competitive. And then I would have probably a strong focus on small business kind of ideas early on, and inventing is something I was really interested in at an early age. Reading books about inventors, kind of like a creator type micro school, I think would be really cool. I would definitely want to learn about technology and learn more about software development at an early age. I see that as a really interesting industry, obviously because I work in it, but also just because of the opportunities that it creates. And I think, there's a lot of great opportunities for people who are really proficient in writing code, and you can have a pretty cool work-life balance. Like my co-founder actually lived out of his truck camper. He had this cool truck camper with a motorcycle attached to it. He lived out in national parks and would go in, work, and then he'd go climb. He's climbed the biggest pitches, rock climbing pitches in the country, and he did that for a couple of years early on after college. So he was able to do that because he was making a great living through software development. So I think a lot of our younger generation, right? Everybody wants to travel, and they see creators on Instagram and social media having autonomy and having, nobody wants that work in a cubicle. So I'd say, for anybody entrepreneurial, I think I would kind of, to segue off that question, I would say that I think that more kids need to be kind of learn their personality and their temperament types, because there's a lot of different tests you can do, but there's sanguine, choleric, melancholy, phlegmatic, and kind of learn how you're wired from an early age, and then go find a profession or a job or opportunity that kind of fits with that. The way that you really like to kind of operate as an individual, I think I think that's going to probably be a really interesting. I'm sure there's people doing it, but that'll probably be a really interesting school model.
Yeah, I think to go to your point about tech specifically, I think that's particularly interesting for kids because there is this sort of great democratization of opportunity that it transcends age in a way that I don't know that we certainly haven't seen in a very long time. It hasn't existed in living memory because age barriers have become more and more accentuated. They haven't disappeared. But with kids and tech, a teenager who can write great code can build a program that the whole world can use. There really is no barrier to entry besides raw skill. And so kids learning technical skills, they can either build things of their own from a very young age, or they can go work for a company much younger than for a lot of other things that you need to break into. Because if you have the skill set,
yep.
There really isn't anything else stopping you. And there are really cool programs too that have emerged that are funding kids who want to build things young, like the Teal Fellowship that'll pay you to skip college or drop out of college, and 1517 Fund that's in the business of funding teenagers who are building businesses. There's a lot of really cool stuff like that out there for kids who want to take this approach that really didn't exist 20 years ago, but definitely were hard to find. It was really hard to come by if it did exist at all. So it's a really rich world that we're living in now for kids to take advantage of, which is very exciting to see what emerges from that.
Absolutely. I think about, I've heard your background story growing up and how you've navigated through different, working to learn programs. And I couldn't agree more. I think that kids are smart, right? You take any kid, they get it. They kind of they can pick up on voice inflection. They can tell if the parent or a teacher is not happy with what they're doing, and they pick up on all that stuff. So I think if you have now more than ever, I remember when there weren't cell phones, but now every kid has a smartphone, and they can see a kid on YouTube making way more than any teacher in his district. And it's I'm like a fruit on the tree, look to see who's teaching me and what kind of results have they produced for their life, and that kind of measures how I kind of take advice. And I know if I was a student, right, stuck in a public school or a school that I wasn't excited about, and if that teacher wasn't, I could tell they weren't excited about what they were doing, and it's just it's going to really make the teaching environment more competitive, which I think will make it really compelling because for teachers, because it'll make it a lot more fun for them when they're incentivized to really dive into stuff they're really interested in, not just maybe teaching math for 15 years because that's what they got their degree in and they're just trying to retire from that. So I think that kind of democratization of education models and how that applies to the teachers and what kind of experience that'll create for students, I think is really cool. The entrepreneurial piece for students, I think, is really interesting. I don't think everybody should try to start their own business. Honestly, I mean, I know you're independent, you're an entrepreneur. Like, there's days where you're 12, 15-hour days, and there's some really highs and lows in business. And I don't think everybody should aspire to that. There's great careers that you can get that have great work-life balances. But so you have to really, I think, really love what you're doing and be passionate about it, because and really enjoy it, because I think there's a lot of days where it is a grind, and but if it's producing the result that you really enjoy, then that's makes it worth it. So I think for too long we've been pushing kids into college who didn't want to go, and now we see this big, our families in the trade still. There's a real lack of blue collar workers, like welders, electricians, builders. And now it's kind of funny because all the builders and electricians, they make more than doctors. The careers are so in demand now that, before it was like, oh, if you want to have a nice life, you have to get a bachelor's degree. Well, now it's like, you can go be an electrician or a plumber. Like, plumbers in our town are making well over 100K a year. And, there's just so many options like that. So I think for too long, we've just been pushing kids into this college experience, really, because colleges are making a lot of money off of it. And so it's kind of where they got pushed. But now it's kind of created a vacuum on the other end of kind of the trades and more hands-on work.
Yeah. What's the vision that you're building towards with Student First? And I know it sounds like there's some things that are under wraps that aren't ready to be talked about yet. So in whatever level of granularity you're comfortable sharing, what is the thing that makes you excited to get up in the morning and go build this? What's the thing that you're working towards?
Yeah. So we're really excited about just making, as education unbundles, right? It's the United States spends over $720 billion on education per year. And it's like the number one line item every state budget. So if you think about it, it's an industry that has, it's people don't like to maybe think about it as a business industry, but if you think of everything that goes into running a public school or a school system, it's like a corporation basically. So as that kind of unbundles and more of that money goes to the families, it's just going to create a plethora of options. And inside of those options, there's a great need to be able to, like you were talking earlier, how do you make families aware of what's available to them in terms of opportunities, funding programs, and so that's what we're really excited about, is increasing the awareness and the different pieces that we're going to Excel in Ed this year. It's a big conference in Salt Lake City. By the time we go there, we'll have released a new website and kind of a new vision for what we're building. But it really just goes to the fact of really kind of lowering the threshold and the friction points for families to learn about all these new options. And that's what we're really excited about, is letting a family who's making a really great experience for a family who is looking for something different, and giving them the resources that they need in an environment where they can go connect with that, with those options and opportunities really easily and effectively.
What about the education landscape as a whole? I know this is a very big, sweeping question, but like, what's the dream there? What is the world that you want to be living in terms of what the education landscape looks like? What is the dream world like 20 years from now, when all of us education entrepreneurs have had our way and we've built all these amazing things for kids to get to access?
Yeah.
What does that look like to you when you think about it?
Yeah, I really think it's a continuation of Milton Friedman's vision. Really, it's like education getting exposed to the free market. A rising tide lifts all ships, and when you've been when the school systems have really just monopolized the industry for so long, it's driven the quality of the product, which is education, down, just because there wasn't an incentive to do better. So I think with the education industry as a whole getting the doors come open on it, and the free market be able to shine into it and kind of do its work, I think that's going to be the most exciting thing we see in the next, really from here on out with education, is just the when incentive structures are aligned correctly and the free market is able to go in there and people are incentivized to do better, the amount of innovation that just happens is going to be, I would like to say that I have like a handle on where I think things are going, but I've been so surprised at how much things have changed over the last couple of years that I think whatever my wildest expectation is of the future for in terms of family experience and opportunities is going to be, I think I'd be shooting low.
Which is a very exciting position to be in when you think that the future is even better than you can imagine. And I agree with you. Things are changing very quickly. And the more I meet the amazing people who are working in this space and hear about the visions they have, there's so much talent here. There's so much passion here. And it really is such a positive sum game where when one person wins, we all win. So I think I agree with you that I think the future is very bright and it's very exciting to think about. Where can people find you? Where would you send them to learn more about both you and also the work that you guys are doing at StudentFirst?
Yeah. So my email is mark@studentfirsttech.com. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out there. Twitter, we're StudentFirst HQ handle on there. LinkedIn, same thing. You can check us out there. Facebook and Instagram, those presences are not yet being actively built, but they will be. But yeah, so Twitter, LinkedIn, our website, www.studentfirsttech.com, is a great resource to kind of learn more about the company and what we're doing. And then, like I said, mid-November here, we'll have kind of a whole new, we're introducing kind of a whole new family member to the suite of services. So we're really excited about that.
That's awesome. I can't wait to see it. Thanks so much for taking the time, Mark.
Absolutely.
This has been
great. I really appreciate, thank you for having me on and really appreciate the conversation. And I want to talk to you more about your experiences and the ecosystem you're building as well in the future, because I think what you're doing with rebelEducator is so cool. I was showing it to my mom the other day and she was like, oh, this is really cool. Like, and I was like, I know, like this is, there's, she's like, oh, this is really kind of gaining steam and like the alternative education movement. So I was like, I think, what you're doing is so important and so valuable. And I'm really excited for the growth that you're seeing and, would love to be helpful in any way that we can in the future. So.
Ditto to you guys. Also, that's a great sign that your mom thought it was cool because she is the target demographic. She's a mom who was doing it. Like those are the people we're trying to reach. So if she thought it was useful, then that means we're doing the right thing, which is always great.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was showing her your website the other day and she's like, this is really cool. And I'm like, Mom, maybe you should get on Twitter and share the world some of the wisdom that you have. Cause, she's just been she's been doing it for so long and is super involved with the community now. And, my dad he was a huge supporter of it as well. He was running the business. So, and he unfortunately passed away last year because of pancreatic cancer. It kind of came on really suddenly. But I know that he would be, he was such a big supporter of homeschooling and alternative education, and really enjoyed that experience with my mom. So, I think I'm trying to get her to be a little bit more vocal about some of the experiences she helped create.
She absolutely should be. I'm very sorry to hear about your dad. And your mom sounds like an absolute wealth of knowledge, and she should 100% get on Twitter because the world needs more people who have done it, who are talking about it. That is, in my mind, like I'm a little biased because I'm a content person, but in my mind, one of the biggest problems that we need to solve is that people just don't know what to do and they don't know what's out there. So the more people we get in the conversation, the better. So if your mom does get on Twitter, please send me her handle as soon as she gets on. I want to be like, you'll probably be her first follower, but I want to be her second.
Okay. Well, likewise, if your parents get on as well, I mean, that's one of my agenda items for going back for Thanksgiving. I'm going to see if I can sit her down in the kitchen while she's in there and help her get an account set up. So
you hear that, Mom? It's time to get Twitter set up. Let's go.
Marcy Duran will turn Marcy Duran loose on Twitter. So
Twitter needs her. I hope that is the case. But thank you so much for your time, Mark. This was a great conversation. I appreciate you coming on. Best of luck with the launch of the new product.
Thanks so much, Hannah, and best of luck with everything you're doing. I look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah, ditto to you.